Welcome in, everyone, to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brazil. It's Tuesday, October 14th, and we got a whole lot to get to. We're starting to do this tomorrow or yesterday, but got the news that came across with James Franklin. Wanted to make sure that I got my full thoughts out for that. So we are recording this right now, and let's go ahead and jump into this. We have some major headlines coming out of Week 7, and we'll start where you expect us to start, over there in State College, Pennsylvania. James Franklin has been fired. He has been let go by Penn State after, I believe, about 13 years at Penn State. Had done an incredible job in a lot of different ways. I believe it was 104-46 when he officially got let go. They obviously lose to Northwestern this weekend on homecoming at home. It went wrong. It went wrong in a hurry. I mean, 17 days ago, he was ahead against Oregon in overtime. They were up by 7 points. It looked like they had a shot to make it happen, and it all kind of fell apart. This is 11 years that James Franklin has been at Penn State, and the biggest thing here is I don't think this is crazy. Now, there's a lot of hurdles to get over, and we will get to that in time. There's no doubt about that. We'll jump into that as it kind of goes on, but I think this makes sense. I think he lost just about everyone you could possibly lose. I think the fans were not really in on it, especially after this past weekend. It seemed like a lot of the players weren't quite as bought in as you want them to be to the coach that they're playing for. I think it all went wrong, and I think it went wrong in a hurry. And I think Penn State saw an opening to do this, and they took it. The biggest thing here to remember is James Franklin's a really good coach. Now, is he a great coach? Is he an elite coach? Probably not. He hasn't quite shown that he can get over that hump, win those big games that Kalen DeBoer is winning right now. A Steve Sarkisian has been able to win at times, but maybe not as consistently as he would like. I think the reality is you're 11 years into this thing, and in 2016, you get the win over Ohio State. You win the Big Ten. Everything is moving in the right direction. And then you kind of go back to normal, and nothing really happens for the next little bit. You don't quite get off the ground. You get to the playoff last year, but you play two teams that you probably should have beat, no matter what. And I get that's a little bit unfair, but it's still the reality of the situation. You look back at the postseason last year, and you're thinking, we beat SMU and Boise State. That's really good. That's great that you got 2 wins in the playoff when you hadn't gotten any prior, but it's not quite good enough. It's not quite where you want to be. It's not quite the teams that you want to be beating and the ones you want to be competing with. You're really close. You were really close, I should say. At the end of the day, you're missing the mark just by a little bit, and I think you lost what you need in this era of college football, which is the buy-in of the fan base. If you don't have that, you're not going to get the money, you're not going to get the donorship, you're not going to get the buy-in that you need from your program going forward. I think this was a decision that probably had to be made. I'm a little shocked it was made this early, and I'm a little shocked it was made in the middle of the season, but that's where you are right now. The biggest thing here is it is about $48 million at the very lowest. 48, 49, maybe 56, somewhere in that realm of things is what this buyout is going to be. How does that affect who they can offer? How does that affect what they can do in this coaching search? Because the reality of the matter is that does handcuff you a little bit. Now, Penn State should be a little bit better off than some other schools. It sounds like the new deal with Adidas is going to pay for quite a bit of this. Now, there's some reports that Adidas made this happen. That's not the case. That's been disputed by a number of people within that program, so I don't think that's what happened. I do think the money from Adidas made this a little bit easier to pull the trigger in the middle of the season. But overall, this is a good job. This is a job that you can do incredible things at. You can win a national title. You can do incredible things going forward at. I don't think it's an elite job. And I think when you look around the country, I think Florida is going to come open here pretty soon once Florida gets into the bye week, regardless of what happens this weekend against Mississippi State. I think Auburn's going to come open a little bit later in the season because we kind of feel what's going on around there and with Hugh Freeze. I think you're sitting below the Florida job and right on even sitting with the Auburn job. And that might sound a little crazy to Penn State fans, and I don't mean that as disrespectful. I think it's a good idea to get into this thing as early as possible because I don't think you're going to be playing the same game. And frankly, I think there's another job in Ann Arbor, Michigan that could open later in the season, and you're definitely not winning over that one. I'm just telling you right now. So we don't really know what this is going to look like. We don't know who they're going to hire, how much money they have to hire him. It sounds like they have enough to make it all happen. Do they have enough to pay the $56 million, give the new head coach and his new staff all new contracts, and then pay $25 million for a roster? Because that's what it requires to compete in the Big Ten going forward, $20 to $25 million every single year. Does Penn State have roughly $100 million to play around with over the next 12 months? Because They better. That's the reality of this situation. I tend to believe they do. I just tend to believe they might be in a little bit more of a corner than some people expect. Now, some of the names that keep popping up, the big one is Matt Rule, the head coach of Nebraska, has done a really good job there. Now, some Penn State fans are bringing up the top 10 rank wins, and I think there's some validity to that. I think it would be better at Penn State. I think you'd have more buy-in. I think you'd have more ability to maybe turn the keys that need to be turned. I think he's a great head coach. There's a couple of names that I would pick if I'm being totally honest. One of them is in Ames, Iowa. Ames, Iowa, excuse me. Matt Campbell. I think he's really, really good at what he does. Now, I think his teams aren't quite as talented as what you would have at Penn State. I think he doesn't have the buy-in that he would have at Penn State. I think he's losing games partly because of that. I think he's a good enough coach to coach on the highest level. I think he's a good enough coach to win a national title. I think Matt Campbell will be a slam dunk hire, and I think you'd be able to do it for just a little bit less than a Kurt Cignetti or a Matt Rule going forward. The other name, Eli Drinkwitz. If you can get him away from Missouri, I'd do it in a heartbeat. That guy is aggressive. That guy is intense, kind of like Kurt Cignetti, where it doesn't hit you over the head. It's not obvious when he walks onto the field, but that guy's really intense. That guy is fiery. That guy's exactly what you need to beat an Ohio State, to beat a Michigan, to do the things that Penn State have been struggling to do over the last couple of years. So I think those are a couple of names. I think Matt Campbell, I think Eli Drinkwitz. If you can do that for a reasonable amount of money and pull them away from the situation they're in, I think Campbell's going to be a little bit easier than Drinkwitz in that case. But at the end of the day, you get one of those guys, I feel pretty confident you can turn this thing into something good. How quickly that happens is still up for debate. We'll see how that develops over the next, 12 months or so. But at the end of the day, I think Matt Campbell, I think Eli Drinkwitz is probably where you start. Now, Matt Rule would be a great hire. He'd probably bring Dylan Raiola over with him. Eli Drinkwitz would probably bring Bo Pribla. So that would be an interesting thing to watch, him kind of just returning to State College. But overall, there's a lot of different things that you're going to have to handle if you're Penn State going forward. There's a lot of different things that you're going to have to weigh. And at the end of it, you're kind of throwing a dart at the dartboard. It's not to say that you don't have a number of great options and a number of guys that I would feel very confident in moving forward. Not every guy is going to win 11, 12, and 13 games in 3 years. That's exactly what James Franklin did the last 3 years. Now, did he win the games that he was wanting to, or the fan base was wanting to, or he was quote-unquote meant to? No, and that's the big difference here. But the reality of the matter is, you never know what's going to happen. You are in the wilderness at this very moment. You just got to hope you find your way out to the right guy, because there's a number of different realities here where you don't get a guy as good as James Franklin, because James Franklin's a really good head coach. Now, is he a top 10, top 5 coach in the country? I think that's up for debate. But the reality of the matter is, not a lot of coaches fit into that realm. Not a lot of coaches fit into that realm consistently, especially in this world of college football, and we'll talk about that here in a second as well. But overall, I think there's a number of different names you can go after. If you want to go a little bit lower on the rung, which I think could be really interesting as well, you can go OCs all along the Big Ten. Will Stein of Oregon, Brian Hartline of Ohio State, Mike Shanahan of Indiana. Those would be a little bit weirder, but definitely more affordable. Really smart individuals know exactly what they want to do offensively, and Will Stein, Brian Hartline, Mike Shanahan, they know exactly what they want to do from a talent acquisition standpoint. So that's the other part of this. I think there's a number of options you can go out and get. There's a number of guys that are going to do incredible things for this program. Before we get out of here, I think it's important to say James Franklin's a really good man. I think that's something that kind of gets lost in this, because he has struggled in the last couple of years. I think there is a lot of criticism that is totally warranted, that is thrown his way. I think the reality of the matter is everyone at Penn State wanted him to be the guy. They wanted him to be the one that took them out of the sanctions era after Bill O'Brien went off to the Texans and got them more out of the scholarship restrictions and the postseason ban, and found his way to the top of the mountaintop. I really believe that. I really believe everyone around there wanted it to be James Franklin, including the fans, including the players, and it just didn't come together. And I think that dude has done incredible things for that program if he ends up being the Mark Richt of Penn State football, which has been talked about quite a bit. And I have some questions about that, because the vast majority of the time you don't find your Kirby Smart after your Mark Richt. You tend to find someone a whole lot worse. But at the end of the day, if that's the case, he'll be looked back on very fondly. The same way that Georgia fans look back on Mark Richt incredibly fondly, because he did miss the mark. He didn't quite hit the massive threshold that you want to hit as a football coach. But he set up this program to be really successful moving forward. I do think if Matt Rule gets hired, I think it's a good one. I think it's a good hire. I think it puts you in a position to compete going forward. I don't think it's the best hire you can make, and I don't think it's the cheapest hire you can make, which might be a bigger thing here. But at the end of the day, I think overall, I think there's a lot of things to take away from this. I think the biggest thing of the bunch is James Franklin did a lot of good at Penn State, and he set up whoever the next coach is going to be in a whole lot better of a spot than he was taking over this program at. So there's a lot of things to be said. There's a lot of different names that will be brought up, and we'll figure that out over the next probably 6 weeks as they figure out going to the end of the season. But at the end of the day, I think there's a couple of names that I would circle. For me, it's Matt Campbell and it's Eli Drinkwitz. For other people, it's Matt Rule. So whoever it is, Penn State's got to hope it works, because if it doesn't, there's going to be another story where you fired a really good head coach to get a guy that takes you just one step back and you're winning 8 or 9 games a year, not 10 or 11. Very much up in the air. We will see what happens, but James Franklin officially out at Penn State much earlier in this season than I think anyone would thought. A lot of people thought he was going to be raising the national trophy, and he will not get close to that. So a lot of different things happening. We'll obviously update you as it unfolds, but a lot of interesting things in the coaching carousel. It is not stopping anytime soon is the other part of that. Now we got to get to the games. Indiana wins 30-20 over Oregon. This is the most impressive performance of the weekend, maybe the most impressive performance of the year, in my opinion. What they did in this game is outright incredible, and it's something that not a lot of teams do to Oregon. Even the Ohio States of the world don't do to Oregon all that often. Now, Ohio State was able to do it in the Rose Bowl, of course, but at the end of the day, Oregon has dudes across every single position that are going to play NFL football at some level, and they're going to play NFL football in every single position room in that entire team. Indiana handed it to them for 60 minutes. It was not even close. Well, it was close. I shouldn't say that. But at the end of the day, from a physicality standpoint, Indiana won this one from tip to tail. Roman Hemby was incredible, had 70 yards, 2 scores on the ground. Fernando Mendoza did have the INT where you're falling off your back foot and just trying to make a play, probably forcing it just a little bit there, but Oregon takes that back to the house. And then he just leads them on a 12-play drive, 75 yards for a touchdown. And Elijah Surratt caps it off with his touchdown. Incredible. It's an incredible feat from a team that, frankly, was probably getting out-athleted here, was probably getting out-talented. They don't care. They're not a team that is going to care moving forward when they play Ohio State. They're going to get out-talented. They're going to get, quote-unquote, athleted. They don't care. They're really good athletes in their own right now, and they might be a step behind some of these teams. They're not too far behind, especially compared to last year. They are not far behind. This is an elite group. They have dudes up front that are going to be absolutely nasty and play in the NFL for a very long time on both sides of the ball. Indiana rolled this Oregon offensive line, a group that had been really good going up to this game, and looking back, I think there's some tests that you look back and you think, was that as tough as we once thought? But at the end of the day, Aiden Fisher was the best player on the football field by a pretty good margin. Elijah Surratt was really good on Saturday. So they got 6 sacks, they got 8 tackles for loss. The pass rush was downright incredible. Brian Haynes coached the best game of football that anyone did this entire weekend, and Steve Sarkisian called a really good game down there in Dallas. Brian Haynes did an incredible job this weekend, did such a good job with simulated pressures, getting Dante Moore overthinking it, because I was listening to Brooks Austin, I should say, and Dante Moore was just guessing. His eyes were not in the right spot. There were some answers at times, and he was not finding it. That's Brian Haynes. That's this Indiana defense just getting after him, making him overthink things, and he's a young quarterback. If you can get him to put his eyes down, take his eyes down from the field just a little bit too long, you're going to have him. There's no doubt about that. So the biggest thing about this team, and it's something that a lot of people have said, is college football teams take on the personality of their coach. That's the reality of the situation. Kirby Smart, those Georgia teams, they're a little bit fiery. They're a little bit intense in a lot of different ways, and we'll talk about that game in a little bit. But at the end of the day, Curt Cignetti is quietly confident, and he's really confident. He always has a chip on his shoulder. He always has a little bit of aggression. He's always willing to talk just a smattering of crap, not necessarily super aggressive, but enough to get a little juice out of his team. That team's incredible, and not enough can be said about the coaching job that has been done there, about the guys that they brought in this offseason with Fernando Mendoza and Pat Coogan and all of these incredible players that have done incredible things for this team. The 2 best players on this team came from JMU with Curt Cignetti. Aiden Fisher and Elijah Surratt are absolute difference makers for this football team, and a lot of people didn't know their name about 24 months ago. These are incredible players, and these are guys that Curt Cignetti trusts and he believes in, and he has done an incredible job with this football team. It can't be said enough. They've made mistakes in this game. They're as mentally tough as any team in the country, and they are darn talented as well. So I'm not writing off Indiana by any means. I'll release my top 25 later today, maybe tomorrow, and I'll get into it. They're probably sitting somewhere around 2 or 3, if I'm being totally honest, but Oregon, I think, will be fine. This is a very good football team. The schedule sets up really nicely to where you get USC and Washington. You win one of those games, you're probably in pretty good shape to move forward. Now, Indiana just gave the blueprint to USC and Washington. Can they do the things defensively that Indiana can do? Probably not, but I do think there's an opening there where Oregon's got to be a little bit careful. I think they're still a CFP team, but definitely can go a little bit awry the rest of the season. Indiana keeps rolling with very few stones in their path. I think they get Maryland later in the season. I believe they get Iowa, if I'm not mistaken. At the end of the day, that should be the team you see in Indianapolis, probably across from Ohio State, but we'll see how it develops the rest of the year. Alabama gets a win on the road at Missouri, 27-24. This is a 3-point win. I think Alabama won by a little bit more than this, at least on the field. It's not to say Missouri played a bad game, but Alabama felt pretty much in control for the vast majority of this football game. And I think the big thing here is Alabama's playing good enough to win a title, plain and simple. Are they at the level right now that Ohio State, Miami, Indiana are? I tend to not believe so, but when you have that quarterback playing that level of football, you can do anything. You can do a number of different things this year, and Ty Simpson is playing, in my opinion, at a higher level than any quarterback in the entire country. I think he's playing absolutely elite football. I think right now he'd probably be my pick for the Heisman. Now, I think Julian Sayin would have a lot to say about that. I think a number of players would have a lot to say about that, including the guy Ahmad Hardy on the other side of the football here. But the throw on 4th and 9 to Lottie Brooks is incredible. It's absolutely eye-popping. There were 5 or 6 throws in this football game where you're thinking, I don't know how you put it better. I don't know how you place it better. I don't know how you move your feet better. I don't know how you manage the pocket better. The dude's a professional player. He's a professional quarterback that happens to be wearing an Alabama jersey right this second. He's incredible. He's going to go in the first round at the end of the year. Just got to keep playing consistent. Really, really good football player. The Missouri run game didn't get going, but I felt like they abandoned it a little bit early. Like this game, Alabama was in relative control. They were up by 10 points or 7 points for most of the football game, but it was never fully out of reach, and it felt like Missouri kind of leaned away from the run and put too much on Bo Pribble's shoulders late in this football game, and he made a couple of mistakes. Now, Damon Wilson, Zion Young on the other side of the football for Missouri are absolute problems, and they're guys that can absolutely get you back on track, get you to the CFP, and hopefully get Bo Pribble just a little bit further down the road without having to do too much. Now, they still get Vanderbilt, they still get A&M, they still get some really tough games. If those two guys can take over and Damon Wilson and Zion Young and that run game can at least get moving and stick to their guns throughout the football game, this still very well could be a CFP team. There's no doubt in my mind. They have a schedule that sets up pretty nicely. They could definitely do some really dangerous things this year. This is just one of those games that you came out on the wrong side of an elite quarterback. And that's kind of what happened to Georgia earlier in the season when they faced Alabama. It was just Ty Simpson playing at a ridiculously high level, and wasn't much to be done on the defensive side of the ball, at least consistently, to stop this unit. LT Overton was the best football player on the field, and he was the Bama defensive end, totally took the Missouri run game out of it. And now I think they probably should have tested him just a little bit more, but he was dominating that game for all afternoon, and it was an absolute difference in this football game. Made Missouri a little bit more nervous to run the football late in this game, and that's the difference in this one. But Alabama's in great shape. They get Tennessee this upcoming weekend. If they win that one, they're off to the races. They are the team that's probably setting the pace in the SEC, except maybe one other team over there in College Station. But at the end of the day, Missouri goes to Auburn, a pissed-off Tigers team. That'll be something to watch. Definitely got to get through that if they want to keep that CFP hopes on the horizon. But going to be really interesting what happens going forward with these teams. I think both of them could be in the CFP. I think Missouri's a little bit more susceptible because of the quarterback play to fall out of it, but I think they have a lot of talent on these two football teams. I think if Ty Simpson plays at that level, you're probably going to see Alabama in the playoff, and you're probably going to see him playing for a national title. As good as that kid has been, it's been an incredible thing to watch, and I think those two teams, Alabama and Indiana, really put on shows this weekend and proved quite a bit to me. Mainly Indiana was an incredible performance from Curt Cignetti's boys, and I think they're going to be a team that might be right in the mix for a national title by the end of the year. A lot of more work to do, but they just got a huge win, the first one that really kind of defines the Curt Cignetti era, and I don't think it's slowing down anytime soon. But let's take our first break here. When we come back, we got some statement wins. Texas wins Red River. USC just rolls over Michigan. Georgia wins a controversial one against Auburn, and a number of other things right after this, so stick with us.